welcome to the Construction Record Podcast. I'm digital media editor Warren Frey. Last week, I attended the Canada Green Building Council's Building Lasting Change Conference held in downtown Vancouver. At the conference, I spoke with CaGBC President Thomas Mueller about the progress that's been made since the council started 20 years ago until now, when the globe is moving towards net zero, though not without pitfalls and challenges. It's also the first time since the COVID-19 pandemic that the conference has been held in person, though it did continue in virtual form while we were all at home. That's where Mueller and I began. What's it like being back with colleagues in the same room? And this is the first time since, I guess, 2019 that it's been in person because of the pandemic. So
yeah, but then we had it online, but not in person, of course, like many other organizations.
And what's the general feeling, having been here, I guess, all of a couple of hours in person again?
Well, we had sessions yesterday, but it's really interesting to see that the audience, there's still some old timers there, but the audience has changed. There's always new people coming into the conference and in our meetings, and there's also a lot of young people that really see an opportunity being involved with CaGBC in terms of their careers. But also, it is more business now, right? It used to be 20 years ago, we launched very environmentally driven, which it still is, but it was these ardent environmentalists, and now it's shifting more to business because it's becoming, green building is becoming a business. There's investment, there are returns on that investment, and that also extends to our decarbonization plans.
Now, you made a comment in your opening remarks about when you started, it was like walking around the desert because nobody else was involved. But that has clearly changed on the organizational level. Yeah. You just talked to the head of the USGBC, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, when we started in the early 2000s, there wasn't even the concept of green buildings was actually just emerging. People were thinking about more energy efficiency in buildings, but we brought it together and using the LEED standard at that time, and still using it as a holistic concept that good buildings, if you want to have good buildings for the environment and for people, these are the things that you need to do. Mm-hmm. And so we organized around that concept. It was a common language in a sense. But there were just no buildings around. I mean, there were one. Now there are close to 6,000, right? And we have 1.5 billion square feet just in our LEED program in Canada, from coast to coast to coast.
Now, you also pointed out some of the stuff that isn't going as fast as it could, or that we're kind of falling down on. Like, for instance, Canada's, of all the G7, the worst for emissions. So you could address some of these problems.
Yeah, you know what? It's we are the report by the Carbon Disclosure Project is very clear that Canada right now is not on track to meet the 1.5. They are last in the G7. Actually, no country, maybe Denmark, even them, I'm not even sure. There are very few countries, if any, actually meeting the 1.5 degree. And it just shows you it's not that they're not doing anything. It's just it's the ramp-up period. It's the ramp-up period because we're changing how we work in the real estate industry, how you do construction, what materials you use, how you design, how you model. There's so many. We're basically changing the system, and changing the system just takes always longer than what you think it will take. And we are right in that phase. We're in that transition phase where we state what we want to do, where we want to be, but it's going to take us longer to get there.
And you also mentioned things that are good. For instance, you had a lot of praise for the federal government, both with the Canadian Infrastructure Bank and other initiatives, at least with their own buildings, to get them to carbon zero.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the federal government, they often don't talk about it that much. It's just the nature of government. Mm-hmm. But they have a very innovative and forward-looking program on how they want to decarbonize their buildings, and how they're going to use their purchasing power to decarbonize, help the industry to decarbonize, bringing down the cost of products, materials, and technologies, bringing down the carbon footprint of products and technologies, like cement, for example, that needs to decarbonize. So they're using their own buildings because they need to walk the talk, but they're also using that to green the supply chain.
Right.
And I think that's a great role for government to have, because as we did with LEED 20 years ago, it was first government who did it. The private sector was watching, and they understood then it was basically government that risked the LEED for the industry, the risk green building for the industry. And we do the same now with zero carbon.
And one of the other things you mentioned was the Infrastructure Act or Inflation Reduction Act.
different names for the same thing.
Inflation Reduction Act,
But it's going to be a huge game changer in terms of just this is American money being poured into the system.
Yeah, because I mean, if you think about what Peter Templeton from CaGBC talked about, is that these companies, they're cross-border companies, right? So if they get money for EPDs, that benefits our industry actually, because environmental product declaration, of course, EPDs. So these investments benefit us, just like there's an opportunity for Canadian companies to business in the United States. There's a fear for some that companies will leave because there's just so much opportunity. But our federal government has put some measures in place that in the last budget and the one before, to invest in Canadian small and medium-sized enterprises in their technology, products, and materials that support the low carbon economy.
Now, what I'm taking away, generally when you talk about young people, the biggest dread they have, and one of the many, is the environment. But I'm getting a sort of a tinge of optimism out of all this. So maybe you could speak to some of the optimism that's in this room right now.
Yeah, well, the optimism is, and that's both the Canada Green Building Council and U.S. Green Building Council as our business partner, is we are implementers. So what we do is always with the focus of implementation. So, for example, the announcement that we have got this big funding from Employment and Social Development Canada to training the industry on low carbon, setting their foundation. This is about doing. And we need to, and that's where the optimism comes from, because we have not just talked about it, we have thousands of LEED buildings now in Canada. The industry, LEED Gold or LEED Platinum, is now table stakes in the commercial real estate industry. We are created a zero carbon standard, the first one in the world, and now we have 200 buildings in the program. No other country has that. So Canada can be really proud of that. So that's where the optimism comes from. We create the optimism is the kind of can do, like the kids book, the little train that could, that's us, right? And we can do it. And we need more organizations that implement. Stop talking. We know most what we need to do, but we need to keep moving forward now.
I also attended the Securing Stakeholder Buy-in for a Low Carbon Transition session, and one of the speakers in the panel was KingSett Capital Sustainability and Resilience Vice President Kit Milne. I spoke to him about recent retrofit projects, strategies for stakeholder adoption of green building practices, and KingSett's new decarbonization tool. Here's the interview.
We're at a panel about getting stakeholders to buy in, and it seems like, I don't know if easier is the right word for it, but it seems like there's more buy-in than there used to be.
Yeah, well, there's a lot more focus, and that's really, as you heard from all of the panelists, around 2018, 2019, that changed across the market and across institutional investors, private investors. The focus on carbon took center stage, and we've all been driving forward on that since.
And before it was electrical efficiency, and you said right at the very end of the panel that because of this focus on efficiency beforehand, you haven't had, at least with your projects, to have to ramp up and add capacity on any of these because it's already there now. Because of that.
Yeah, that's it's very true. And with the new technology, not new, but adoption of technologies like heat pumps, you gain so much additional efficiency that you are able to, in most cases, keep the electricity supply that the building already has as adequate for doing the fuel switch.
And you mentioned also in terms of, I wouldn't say this is best practices, but just an approach. Don't take on a ton of different projects. Don't take on the toughest project. Go for the one that you can prove something to your stakeholders with.
I think it's really important to show confidence with your investors and your stakeholders that this is achievable, and you're not going to do something to your asset that puts it out of market or creates a lot of capital that they're going to have to take on as non-recoverable. And when you do that, at least from what we've seen, is you get that confidence, and then you get the ability to expand your reach and then target more difficult ones. It really, though, does come down to ensuring that, your equipment is near or already at end of life. You're going to be fast tracking some, but that's just the nature of decarbonizing and doing significant mechanical renewals at once. Historically, you never replace your heating and cooling in the same year. That's always been stretched over, 3 to 5 to 7 years, and it creates a nice level capital requirement. Decarbonization does require a significant amount of upfront capital, but then once you do that, you're gaining a ton of efficiency and carbon tax avoidance on the backside 1 year after you execute the strategy. So it's more upfront, but it plays out better over the long term.
And you said at a project you've done, I assume in Toronto, because it was in King Street. So maybe you could talk about that project.
Yeah, so 40 King was an almost all electric building. That was our first one we did. Very few natural gas systems that we had to look at swapping out and figuring out how to do that. We've since expanded to decarbonizing the Royal York Hotel, and that's to a tune of cutting 7,700 tons of carbon, 80% or more carbon reduction by getting off of steam, another very carbon intensive energy source. And we've just actually last November, Scotia Plaza is a 3-building complex. 100 Yonge is a 250,000 square foot building that we just decarbonized in November with a heat pump solution that can operate down to negative 30 degrees Celsius. So it's the first of its kind cold climate heat pump solution that actually can function within the parameters of Canadian cold winters.
And another thing I think you mentioned was that to the clients going into these buildings, they shouldn't notice a difference at all. Like they should just go to the office or wherever, and it shouldn't make a difference to them, but it's all in the back end.
And funny enough, like they shouldn't notice a difference, or the difference they should notice is they've got more thermal comfort. They've got more controllability of their space, because every decarbonization strategy we're looking at, it's not just a simple take out the boilers and the chillers, put in heat pumps. It's you're building out a better BAS system, building automation system. It's adding additional control so you have more ability to dial up and down as occupancy, as seasons change. And it's providing more controllability for your tenants. So they now have more zones within their space, more thermostats that they can dial up and down to their needs.
And one of the things that one of the other panelists mentioned was that it used to be there was interest from stakeholders, but nothing like there is now.
Yeah, I mean, so you see it from the institutional side. Everyone is being pressured by their own stakeholders or markets to really move and act on decarbonizing or climate change, whether, that could be resilience, physical and transitional. So we've seen a tremendous amount of support from that front. We see it on the private side as well. It feels like everyone's on the same page now, and everyone's now trying to drive towards the same end goal, which creates tremendous amount of opportunity for collaboration.
And finally, you have a new tool coming out, I assume, as of today. So where can people get it, and what is it?
So the tool is KingSet's Building Decarbonization Modeling file, which helped us build out the financial analysis and the impact on carbon and energy to really get the confidence from our asset managers, from our investors, to show them we're taking in everything into account, and we're not looking at a traditional 3 to 5 year plan. We're looking at 10 to 15 years, because we want to see, does a business as usual strategy cross over operationally to be more cost effective or less cost effective than a zero carbon? Where does zero carbon play in? When does it become more accretive than business as usual? Mm-hmm. And it's pretty interesting with being very conservative on numbers, seeing that the numbers do pencil out. You may be paying more on the capital side, but you're gaining so much efficiency on the operational side that even when you include amortization of those equipment over their lifetime, the zero carbon approach, in almost all scenarios, becomes more cost effective than the business as usual one. And where it doesn't, it's typically within like a 5% delta, and that's manageable.
Thanks for listening to the Construction Record Podcast. You can hear us on Amazon Music, Apple Music, and Spotify, as well as daily commercial news and Journal of Commerce websites.